the Ardent Small fired her last torpedo and then held 9 enemy warships off a crippled convoy for 6 hours. She did it with nothing aboard but a working fire control set and a woman who would not switch it off. The time of that last shot was 0411. Her name was Ilse Vantor, and she was the ship's gunnery officer, and she was 29, and the reason she is taught rather than merely remembered is that what she did was not brave in any way that would have helped. It was arithmetic about somebody else's caution. The situation was not survivable, and everybody understood that. The Ardent Small was an escort of 1,900 tons with a crew of 81. She had taken a hit through her aft magazine in the first 11 minutes, and she was standing between a Kessin squadron and 4 transports carrying 11,000 evacuated civilians who could not run because 2 of them had lost drive. Her captain was dead. Her executive officer was dead. What remained on the bridge was a lieutenant, 2 ratings, and a gunnery officer with an empty ship. Vantor's own account, given 19 years later and only once, is 4 sentences long at the point that matters. We had nothing to shoot with. We had a radiating set and a hull that looked exactly like a hull that could shoot. I did not have a plan. I had a switch, and I did not turn it off. What a fire control set does, and why leaving it on mattered, requires a short explanation, and it is the whole of the story. A warship illuminating a target is a warship preparing to fire. That is not a convention. It is a physical fact, because the set exists to compute a firing solution, and there is no other reason to point it at anything. When a Kessin sensor officer sees an enemy fire control emission tracking his own hull, he knows a solution is being computed on him, and he has somewhere between 40 seconds and 4 minutes. What he cannot know is whether the ship computing it has anything left to fire. Magazine state is invisible. It is the one thing about an enemy warship that cannot be measured at any range by any instrument, and it is inferred, always, universally, from behavior. A ship that has stopped firing has either run out or is holding fire, and those look identical, and the standard Kessin assumption in the presence of an illuminating set is the conservative one. So the Ardent Small, with nothing in her tubes, tracked and dropped and retracked 9 Kessin hulls for 6 hours, and every time her set settled on a target, that target maneuvered. 9 warships spent 6 hours avoiding a ship that could not have hurt any of them, and the reason it worked is that being wrong about it once costs a hull. The plot rating was called Theodore Suvi, and he was 19, and he is the reason the tracking worked at all. A fire control officer cannot see the tactical picture. The console shows a solution, not a situation, and somebody has to sit beside it and say where the 9 hulls are and which way they are turning and which of them has come about since the last look. Suvi did that for 4 hours and 40 minutes, with a plot he was reconstructing by hand from a damaged repeater, and he was not a specialist, and he had been aboard 11 weeks. The bridge recorder caught almost none of what passed between them, because they were speaking across about a meter of space and mostly in fragments. But it caught enough, and the 4 minutes that survive have been transcribed and are used in training. 2 is coming round. 2 coming round, he's going to cross behind 5. Take 5 then. 5 is bows on, he will see it. Then he will move. Take 5. It is not stirring, it is 2 exhausted people doing a technical job at speed. And what the training material draws attention to is that neither of them ever explains anything to the other, and that Suvi twice tells her she is wrong. He was killed by a fragment at 0904. Vantor did not stop tracking and did not have anybody to replace him, and for the last hour and 18 minutes she worked the plot and the solution simultaneously, which is not possible to do well, and which she did badly, and which was still enough. Her only recorded remark about him is from the lecture, and she gave it every time, and it is not sentimental. He told me I was wrong twice in 4 hours. Both times he was right. He was 19, and he had been aboard 11 weeks, and he corrected a lieutenant on a bridge with the ship coming apart, and if he had not, I would have held a track 90 seconds too long in front of a squadron commander who was counting. The tracking was not automatic, and this is the part that has been dramatized out of every popular account. A fire control set does not simply run. It has to be pointed. Somebody has to select a target, hold the solution, judge when to drop it and where to move next, and the whole performance has to look like the behavior of a ship that is choosing its shot rather than a ship that is bluffing. Vantor did that, alone, at a console, for 6 hours and 11 minutes, without relief. She had one rating feeding her plot information and no other assistance, and the discipline she applied to it is the thing the staff colleges take apart. She never held a solution longer than about 90 seconds, because a ship that has a solution and does not fire is a ship that cannot. She never tracked the same hull twice in succession. She favored the two heaviest units because a real gunnery officer with limited ordnance would, and she twice dropped a perfect track on a light escort to shift to a capital hull, which is exactly what somebody with 4 torpedoes and a hard choice would have done. At 2 points, she illuminated nothing at all for 9 and 11 minutes respectively, which the reconstruction identifies as the most sophisticated thing she did. If you track continuously, you are a machine, and machines do not run out. I wanted them to see somebody thinking. Somebody thinking stops sometimes. The Kessin squadron commander was a professional of some distinction, and his conduct has been defended by his own service ever since, correctly. He had 9 hulls against 1 crippled escort and 4 disabled transports. He could have closed and finished it in about 40 minutes at a cost he would have considered acceptable. He did not, because the cost was not the point. His orders were to destroy the convoy. The convoy was not going anywhere, and there was no reason whatsoever to accept torpedo damage to a capital hull in order to accomplish 40 minutes sooner what he could accomplish safely by attrition. So he stood off and worked the escort with long-range fire and maneuvered to spoil her solutions and waited for her to be ground down, and this was in every respect the correct decision. His post-war statement is the fairest thing anybody has said about the engagement. I have been asked whether I was deceived. I was, and I would like to be precise about the nature of it, because I was not deceived about anything I could have checked. I believed that ship had ordnance. I had no way to establish otherwise, and I still have none. Magazine state cannot be observed. I made the assumption every officer in my service is trained to make, and that I would make again tomorrow. And it was wrong on that occasion, and it will be right the next 4 times. She did not defeat my judgment. She found the one thing my judgment could not see, and she stood in it for 6 hours. The Ardent Small was hit 14 more times over those 6 hours and lost 41 of her remaining crew. She was not maneuvering because she could not. Her drive had gone in the 2nd hour, and she held position by attitude thrusters alone, which meant she was a fixed target being engaged at leisure by an enemy who was simply unwilling to come inside her presumed torpedo envelope. The damage control accounts from that period are the least quoted and the worst. Compartments were sealed with people in them on the standard rule because a ship holding position with a fire control set running needs power, and power meant the reactor spaces, and the reactor spaces had to be isolated from 4 separate floods. Vantor knew. She was on the same circuit as damage control, and she heard every one of those decisions, and she kept tracking. She was asked about that once by an interviewer who had clearly prepared the question, and it is the only recorded instance of her being sharp with anybody. You are asking whether I thought about switching it off. There were 11,000 people in those transports, and about 900 meters of my ship between them and a squadron. Yes, I thought about it. I thought about it for 6 hours, continuously, while doing something else, and I did not do it. And I have never once been confused about whether that was right. What I have never been able to do is describe it in a way that makes anybody feel better, and I have stopped trying, and I would be grateful if you moved on. What it was like in the transports is documented, and it is not what anybody expects. 11,000 people, 4 hulls, 2 of them without drive. They could see the engagement. Not in detail. A civilian transport has no tactical display, but a warship taking fire 900 meters away is visible from any viewport, and there were a great many viewports and nobody could be kept away from them. The transport masters made a decision in the first hour that has been criticized since, and that all four of them defended for the rest of their lives. They told the passengers the truth. Announcements every 20 minutes on the general circuit in plain language what was happening, that the escort was between them and 9 warships, that the escort was being hit, and that there was nothing anybody aboard could do. The alternative was silence, and silence in a hull full of people who can see out of a window produces rumor, and rumor in 11,000 people in 4 transports produces something nobody could have contained. The senior master's log entry for the 4th hour is 4 sentences, and it is the reason the practice is now standard in evacuation operations. They are frightened, and they are behaving well. I have told them 9 times that we cannot help, and I will keep telling them. What I will not do is let them find out from each other. Somebody in the aft section has started reading names off the escort's crew list, which we hold because we are her convoy. I have not stopped it, and I am not going to. The reading went on for 2 hours. The list was 81 names, and it was recited over and over by whoever was nearest to it, and it was still going when the relief force arrived, and about 400 people in that compartment could recite the crew of the Ardent Small from memory for the rest of their lives. The relief force arrived at 1022, and the engagement ended in about 4 minutes. The Kessin squadron withdrew in good order and without loss, which it could do because it had spent 6 hours in a posture of caution and had never committed. That is the ordinary and unsatisfying outcome of a successful delaying action. Nobody is destroyed. The enemy leaves, and the thing that was defended is still there. 11,000 civilians reached Harrow Station. The Ardent Small was not salvageable. She was towed clear, surveyed, and broken up 11 months later, and the survey found her 4 torpedo tubes empty and her magazine spaces flooded and burned out, which is the physical confirmation of the whole account, and which was not published for 19 years for reasons that were never adequately explained. Of 81 crew, 22 came off her alive. Vantor was one of them. She was found still at the fire control console with the set running and the plot rating dead in the chair beside her, and she had, according to the boarding officer's report, to be told twice that she could stop. The boarding officer's report is 9 lines, and it is the only contemporaneous description of her that exists. Found gunnery officer at fire control, set radiating, tracking active. Advised her the action was concluded. She acknowledged and continued tracking. Advised again. She asked me to confirm the relief force was in visual, and I did so, and she then dropped the track and switched off the set and stood up. She asked about the transports before she asked about her own ship. I told her all 4 were intact. She then asked how many of her people were alive, and I did not have a number and told her so. She did not ask anything else. I would record that she was entirely composed throughout, and that I found this more difficult to witness than distress would have been. The decoration was refused, and the refusal caused a great deal of institutional difficulty. She was recommended for the highest award the service had, and she declined it in a letter of 9 lines, which was published without her consent 40 years later, and which is the reason anybody outside the service knows her name. I am grateful, and I am refusing, and I would like to give the reason plainly rather than let it be assumed to be modesty. The award is for valor. What I did required no courage that I can identify. I sat at a console in a ship I could not leave and pointed a working instrument at people who could not tell it was empty, and at no point did I take a risk, because there was no version of the afternoon in which I was safer doing something else. 41 people died in my ship's compartments while I did it, and they were sealed in by damage control decisions taken correctly. If the service wishes to decorate somebody for that afternoon, I would suggest it look at the damage control officer, who made 9 of those decisions in 6 hours, and who is alive and who has not been recommended for anything. I do not want an award that says I was brave. I would accept one that said, The set stayed on because that is what happened. The service, after some difficulty, decorated the damage control officer. Vantor received nothing and never raised it again. The tactical lesson was absorbed quickly, and the countermeasure is now doctrine on both sides, which means the trick will never work again. Kessin practice after the war required that a persistently illuminating enemy be tested, a single light unit sent inside the presumed envelope, deliberately as a probe, accepting the risk of losing it in exchange for resolving the question. Human doctrine adopted the same thing within 4 years and for the same reason. It costs a ship, sometimes, that is understood and accepted, and the arithmetic behind it is the coldest paragraph in either service's tactical manual, and both versions say essentially the same thing. A hull risked to establish an opponent's magazine state is a hull well spent. 6 hours of a squadron's caution is worth more than a light escort, and the enemy knows this too. Send the probe. Vantor came across that paragraph in her 50s, in a manual, in a library, and her only recorded comment on it is characteristically flat. Good. They should. It was going to stop working the moment somebody thought about it properly, and I'm surprised it took 4 years. I would point out that the doctrine still costs them a ship. That is the shape of it now. I made them spend 6 hours, and now they spend a hull instead. And either way, somebody pays for not being able to see inside a magazine, and nobody has ever found a way to actually look. Ilse Vantor left the service at 34 and spent the rest of her working life as a harbor pilot, which is a job that involves boarding ships in bad weather and telling their masters what to do. She was, by every account, extremely good at it and completely uninterested in discussing anything else. The one thing she did agree to, twice a year for 30 years, was to talk to gunnery courses, and her lecture never changed and was never written down and is reconstructed from the notes of about 400 officers who heard it. She spent the first 10 minutes on magazine state and the physics of what can and cannot be observed. She spent the next 20 on the specific behaviors she had used, the 90-second limit, the target rotation, the 2 deliberate pauses. And she spent the last 5 on the thing she actually wanted them to have, which is not about deception at all. Everything I did that afternoon worked because their assumption was correct. Ships with fire control sets have ordnance. That is true. It is true nearly always, and it is why the assumption exists, and it is a good assumption, and you should make it too. I want you to understand that I did not defeat their doctrine. Their doctrine was right, and I was the exception, and the reason I could be the exception is that they could not check. So the lesson is not be clever. The lesson is find the thing your enemy cannot check, and then ask yourself what they are assuming about it, and then ask what it costs you to be the exception. Most of the time, the answer is that it costs too much. That afternoon, it cost me nothing, because I was already dead if it failed. The fire control console from the Ardent Small was recovered during the breaking survey, and it is the only part of her that survives. It is at the gunnery school. It is not in a hall or a case. It is in the teaching room, bolted to the deck, wired to a simulator, and it is used. Cadets sit at it. It is a 1,900-ton escort's fire control position from a class that went out of service a century and a half ago. And the ergonomics are poor, and the display is primitive, and it is deliberately kept in the syllabus because the school's view is that an instrument you have used is not the same as an instrument you have seen. The exercise run on it is always the same, and every cadet does it once. They are given 9 targets, an empty magazine, and 6 hours compressed into 40 minutes, and they are told to hold. The simulator scores nothing and produces no result. There is no way to win it and no way to fail it. The enemy withdraws at the end regardless, because that is what happened. The only feedback is a number displayed when the exercise ends, which is the number of times the cadet's tracking pattern would have told a competent observer that the magazine was empty. Vantor's own number, reconstructed from the engagement record and displayed on a small plate above the console, is 0. There is no other text on the plate. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.